The station where our veterans' voices are heard. MBR Talk.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. You're giving veterans a voice today. Powered by WorkSimple, where we simplify your mission.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Lock in every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, for Tracer Rounds targeting veteran resources.
You wonder why life feels like chaos, like tracer rounds flying all around you? That's why I created the Tracer Rounds podcast. Every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, I help cut through the noise and point veterans to those resources they need. Since 2023, join us.
To hear interviews with veteran artists, veteran business owners, and businesses that support veterans. Catch us on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and MB Radio. If you miss a show, you can listen again on Wreaths Across America Radio every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Tune in to see if you are on target. MBR, giving veterans a voice.
And welcome back to the Tracer Round Show. And I'm Terry, your host. And with me tonight is Shoebob Carey, who is a retired Navy captain. Welcome, Bob.
Well, thank you very much for having me on board.
I'm so excited to have you because I know there's a backstory to Shoebob, and so we'll save that. And if you want to tell us, you will. But if you don't, then it'll remain a mystery, I guess. But you were in the Navy, obviously, and you were a captain, and you had a varied career. You were surface warfare, and then you were also aviator. So can you kind of talk about your service and talk about why you started in one lane or one direction and then kind of pivoted and did another?
Sure. So I started off as a surface warfare officer because with glasses, it was, I wasn't going to be a pilot, and everyone was telling me that, you don't want to be a naval flight officer. You're not the guy with the stick. So go be a ship driver, because then you get to run things. Well, I did my first tour on board a destroyer, and I did that for 1 year, 11 months, 14 days, 53 minutes, 28 seconds. I think you can tell how great I thought that tour was by the specificity with which I clocked it. I'll tell you this: if I had been able to drive and fight my ship as much as I got to fly and fight my airplane, I'd have stayed ship driver. But I didn't join to be a mid-level material manager. I wanted to be a warrior. So I went aviation, and that was very cool. I got to be an A6 bombardier navigator. A6 was a older aircraft. They retired it finally in 1997. And I did that for 8 years. About 8 years. And I was on board USS America, and we served in, we were active in Desert Storm. We were one of the carriers that was sent over there. And so, I don't know, did 35, 40 missions during Desert Storm. And that was, a really impactful part of my life. Come a couple of years later, we're starting to look at the peace dividend, and they're getting rid of a lot of stuff, including the A6. And I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to go check out something else. And they offered me a year's severance pay to get out. I had to stay in the reserves. I was fine with that. I wanted to stick around. Yeah. And so I went to the reserves, and I went to work in my day job in the U.S. Senate as a military legislative assistant. And I did that for 8 years. And then 9/11 happens. And what I thought was going to be, my sleepy hollow of 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year of reserve duty ended up being 6 mobilizations post 9/11.
Wow. And
so a couple of them were, were pretty easy. A couple of them were downrange. But one of the things that's also sort of nice is I actually went back to being a surface warfare officer in the reserves, because I had a wise mentor that, as I was a lieutenant at the time, 03, when I first got into the reserves, and they're like, we're dying for junior officer, commanding officer of 125, 150 sailor reserve units. Go back to being a SWO and we'll make you a commanding officer. It's like, okay, sure. So I send in the letter to the Bureau of Personnel, and I still knew the detailer at the time, and he calls me up and he's like, this is the greatest prank ever. Your old squadron mates sent in a letter saying that you want to be a ship driver again. I said, no, that's actually me. I told him why. So he calls me back about 3 days later, and he's totally confused at that time. He goes, okay, let me figure out what I need to do. Calls me back about 3 days later. Yeah, we had a selection board. You're the only person on it. It lasted 5 minutes. You're a ship driver again. Hope you like it. So,
Oh my goodness.
so that's what I did, and so I was lucky. I had 6 commanding officer tours. It was a lot of fun. There are some downsides of the reserve time, especially post 9/11.
Yeah, there were a lot of
But
deployments for sure.
I was blessed. Yeah, I was blessed with a pretty varied and pretty dynamic career.
So what did you do as a ship driver in the reserves? Because you didn't really get the opportunity
So-
to do that, did you?
Actually, I did.
Yeah.
So my very first unit was a ship augment unit, 125 sailors, and we would go down and support the frigates during counter-drug operations
Okay.
in the Caribbean. And so I would usually do 2 or 3 periods of active duty a year, and it was pretty. I scuba dive, so I'd like meet the ship like in Puerto Rico, and then I'd get off the ship 2 weeks later in the Cayman Islands, and I'd go down early, do a little diving, stay a little late, do a little diving. So it's like, okay, I can do this. But that was basically in the reserves, it's all the stuff that the Navy thinks they need to have, but they can't justify having someone full time. So I had command of a ballistic missile submarine force protection unit, a mobile command center, a staff unit supporting 5th Fleet out in Bahrain, the ship augmentation unit, an air and naval gunfire liaison unit. It was a pretty varied career.
Wow, it sounds like it. You got to do a lot of amazing things. And I
did.
And you were just surface warfare to begin with, and you didn't really like it. And then you turned full circle and came back to it because it really offered some opportunities that were exciting.
The people at the Bureau of Personnel believe that I'm the only person that has ever voluntarily gone back to being a ship driver, being an aviator.
I could see that because, I mean, being a pilot is pretty awesome, and it's got a lot of prestige with it, I'd say. Do you
Indeed.
fly?
Go ahead.
Do you still fly?
So they never taught me how to fly. They never taught me how to fly. As a naval flight officer, all they taught me how to do was talk on the radios, communicate, navigate, how to bomb, how to help the pilot. But I didn't even have a stick and throttle on my side of the aircraft.
Wow.
So if something happened to the pilot, my only option was eject us.
Oh my goodness. That's kind of scary. A little bit.
Yeah.
So what do you think from that time influenced you more? Do you think being on the aviation side or being on the surface warfare side? Which side do you think really shaped your career and your trajectory and where you headed after service?
I think both. And let me tell you why. So you talked about my call sign, Shoebob.
Mhm.
And the reason, I don't explain it a whole lot in my biography is it's a really inside baseball call sign for the Navy. I would say the Navy is probably the most tribal of all the services, to the point where we have different uniforms between officer and enlisted. We have different uniforms between the different corps, between the aviators and the ship drivers. And the ship drivers wear black shoes with their khaki uniforms, and the aviators wear brown shoes with their khaki uniforms. It's an old thing that came over from World War II.
Okay.
And so there's a black shoe Navy and a brown shoe Navy, and the two don't really like each other. And the brown shoes especially don't like the black shoes because I think the black shoes are too uptight and sweat too much, sweat the small stuff. So the worst thing that a brown shoe can say to another brown shoe is, "Dude, you're acting like a black shoe." Or the worst is, "Stop being a shoe." So I get to my first squadron. I'm wearing my, my wings above my ribbons. I'm wearing my ship driving pin below my ribbons. I walk into the squadron. They're apoplectic. You're a black shoe in our squadron? Skipper, can we send him back? Then finally, one of the senior officers comes up to me and goes, fine. Your call sign is Shoebob. So you're reminded 15 to 20 times a day how much we hate you being here. Fine by me. But now, a lot of people in town know me as Shoebob. And so, I'll be walking around town and I'll hear Shoebob. And it's like, so I don't mind it. I don't mind it.
That's funny. I didn't realize there was such a rivalry or a rub between aviators and warfare sailors. That's interesting.
Oh yeah. Great time.
I mean, I guess we get that a little bit in the Army with airborne and infantry and those that have admin positions. They call us chairborne. So, I guess I get that.
I tell everyone that, when I was a ship driver, that is the Navy equivalent of a straight leg sailor. Nothing special. Just go out and do your job. Straight leg infantry. So, being a ship driver, 11 Bravo all the way. I'm fine with that.
I love that. So you had your career, you went in the reserves, and what did you do after? Because you retired from the reserves, right?
I did. I retired from the reserves in 2015.
Okay. And so what did you do after that?
Well, I mean, when I was in the reserves, I first went to work in the U.S. Senate for 2 different senators. I worked there for 8 years. First as a military legislative assistant and eventually becoming a legislative director. And then I got mobilized out of the Senate the first time. When I came back, one of the senators with whom I worked had now become the Secretary of Energy. So he asked me to come on over to the Department of Energy and be one of the financial officers, deputy chief financial officer. So I was a budget geek in the Department of Energy for 2 years. I get mobilized again. And then I this time I got mobilized to New York City.
Wow.
And I decided to stay up there. And so I lived up there for 4 years. And got married and had my first boy up there. And then I got the opportunity to go teach at the Naval War College. So we moved to Newport, had our second child there, our second son there. And then after that ended, I started getting involved in some of this military voting issues. And eventually I became the director of the Federal Voting Assistance Program at the Department of Defense. And we moved back down to Washington, D.C. And so, one of the things about the military voting is that some of your viewers may remember this. So I was the director of the Federal Voting Assistance Program from 2009 to 2012. And many people probably have been or remember the voting assistance officers. And I, I'd go around to all the states and talk to the state election officials and local election officials. And I say, 2 truths and a lie. I joined the Navy to lead good men and women in combat, to fly jets off of carriers, and to be a voting assistance officer. And I was trying to say to these folks, no one joins the military to be a voting assistance officer. So what I really tried to do was put it all online and let the geeks, the voting geeks that were in my agency, let us do it so that the voting assistance officers didn't have to do this squat. And we think it really helped. I mean, we increased military voter participation by about 25-30% in the 2010 and 2012 elections, in large part because it's made it easier for them by putting it all online. I actually sent out an email to the entire military 5 times a year in election years.
Oh wow!
I get this command sergeant major who calls me up, and I answer the phone, and he goes, "This is Bob Carey, director of Federal Voting Assistance Program." "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" "Yeah, this is command sergeant major whoever." "I get it. I'll send my troops to ffap.gov. Now, can I please be taken off your email distribution list?" And so I was running down the hall of our officers going, "We are spam. We are spam. We've achieved success.
Right. Oh my goodness. So that's really great that you were able to increase the voter participation, because I know there's a lot of younger airmen, sailors, Army soldiers, just military in general, that don't vote or don't really think it's important or don't really know why they should.
Younger people in general don't vote. So, everyone would be like, oh my gosh, the general population voter participation rate is 50-60%, but for the military, it's only 25%. And finally, I went and checked out the numbers. I was like, okay, the average American is 45 years old. The average person in the military is 26.
Yeah.
52% of the American population is women. 15% of the military population is women. And women vote at a higher percentage than men. When you actually compare 26-year-old men in the military to 26-year-old men in the civilian sector, they actually voted a higher rate. So that was one of the big things I did, was try to, put things in context of actual demographics. Don't expect 26-year-old soldiers, worried about the staff sergeant drilling them down to vote, to worry about voting the same way that a 65-year-old guy would vote. Right.
That's certainly the truth. So when you did all that, then how did you transition to the National Defense Committee? How did you start that up? What was the transition period?
So the National Defense Committee. So every single male on both sides of my family for the past 3 generations has been in the Navy, at least for a little bit. And my uncle was a retired admiral. He started up National Defense Committee in 2003. And it was to work on military and veteran legal, constitutional, and civil rights. So I got back. The reason I got involved in military voting is that in 2004, I'm living in New York City. I'm working a couple of political campaigns. I get mobilized 3 weeks before the 2004 election. Too late for me to be able to ask for an absentee ballot. Luckily, I had mobilized, but I had not deployed yet. I was able to take leave, fly home, vote in person, fly back that night. And then on the back end, my mobilization got extended a month before the New York City mayoral election. And we sort of cared about it in New York City because, 8 million people, we cared about a mayoral election.
Right.
And so I had redeployed back to the States. I had not been discharged yet. Again, I took leave, flew up to New York City, voted in person, flew back that night. And so I was telling my uncle this story, and he gets a call from the Election Assistance Commission, another federal agency that works on elections. And he's like, hey, you want to go testify before the Election Assistance Commission about this? So I go. And apparently I was channeling my inner Khrushchev, all gesticulation and spittle, banging the desk. And so I met some people from the Pew Center on the States.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very interested in putting something together about this. And so I started working with them for a couple of years on reforming military voting. And I was a very big critic of the Department of Defense's Federal Voting Assistance Program. Well, the previous director finally resigned, and I get a call from the Department of Defense saying, apply for the job or shut up. So I applied for it and I got it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And the rest is history, right?
Exactly. So I did that for 3 years, and then I went back into the private sector.
So the National Defense Committee then was started by your uncle.
Correct.
And then how did you?
My uncle and one of his old Navy JAGs, and they focused at first on military voting and freedom of conscience of chaplains to be able to preach what they wanted to be able to preach, and then like reemployment rights, and so I came back to it in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
As you'll see, in the crawl or underneath my name, it says Chief Bottle Washer, National Defense Committee. And I told them that I would be happy to come back and run it if they let me have the title of Chief Bottle Washer. And they're like, okay, why? It's like, well, all these nonprofit executive directors. I'm sort of old school. I think a nonprofit person in charge of a nonprofit needs to be called an executive director. It's like all these nonprofit executive directors are now calling themselves chief executive officer. And it's like, when's the last time you ran a profit and loss line? So I said, yeah, I want to be chief bottle washer because I roll up my sleeves and I work to get things done. And
sounds like it.
And one of my proudest moments, I was testifying before the House Veterans Affairs Committee on some military and veteran Second Amendment rights issues. And they introduced me as Shoebob and chief bottle washer. And Representative Eli Crane, who's from Arizona, whose bill we were discussing, who's also a retired Navy SEAL, he goes, Shoebob and chief bottle washer. These are some interesting stories, but I only have 5 minutes for my questions, so I'm going to get right to my questions. So, good one.
That's awesome. So I know the organization, National Defense Committee has 4 priorities, and they're military voting rights, military vet and healthcare, military and vet healthcare, and then veterans education benefits, and then due process for gun rights, like you're talking Second Amendment. So you're in step with the Richard Starr Act as part of this vet healthcare as a priority.
Indeed, and you know, I got involved with Major Richard Starr Act 7 years ago, and this has been a long time coming. And for you know, for those of your audience who may not know what goes on here, if someone is, you know, injured or wounded in service and it's a significant wound or injury, rather than just discharge them if they haven't hit 20 years, they'll oftentimes medically retire them under what's called Chapter 61
right.
of the U.S. Code. And there's a very complex process for calculating how much of a retirement they'll get. It's not just a straight, you know, if you're an E4 over 4 years, they're not going to give you the equivalent of a regular retirement of E4 over 4 years because you're going to get like $200 a month. Yeah. They have a calculation methodology that takes into account your disability and raises that a bit.
Yeah.
The problem is that for years, there's been this law that says you can't draw more than one federal payment at a time. And it used to be like officers, up until the 90s, officers, if they retired, couldn't go work for the federal government and get paid. They had to give up their federal pay if they wanted to keep their retirement, or vice versa. Oh, wow. So, and so the same thing was happening here. If a medically retired veteran was drawing both their medical retirement and VA disability compensation, they had their medical retirement reduced by the amount of their disability compensation. And they're two totally different things given for two totally different reasons.
Right.
And they shouldn't offset each other. And so what this bill does is basically alleviate that. And there's been some people on the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, Republican and Democratic, who think that these veterans don't need that much money. And our attitude is that is just philosophically wrong.
It is.
They earned it independently. They earned a military retirement for one reason. They earned a disability compensation for another reason. They should be able to draw both.
Right.
But there is this condescension oftentimes within Congress that they know better what is good for a veteran, or they'll say they don't need that much money. We're gonna cut it back, and I just think that's fundamentally wrong, and so do a lot of the folks. So we're making real headway. It looks like the Major Richard Starr Act for the very first time is going to get a vote for passage on the House floor on Monday. Wow. Excuse me, on Friday. And then we're looking to try to see what we can get in the Senate. We'd very much like to try to get this passed before the 4th of July, so the president can sign it before the 4th of July. It's probably looking more likely that it's going to be sometime later in July if we do get this passed. There's a lot going on. This has been an incredibly dynamic time, but this is the closest we've ever gotten, and we're pretty excited.
Do you see it passing, or do you still see the resistance? And why so much resistance? I know you said that they feel like the veterans get paid enough and they're not due anything else, but I mean, shouldn't they have enough pushback from the veteran community and their own communities that support veterans to say, we want this. Why are you dragging your feet, or why are you opposing this?
So National Defense Committee has partnered with some other organizations in the area. We call them the Billboard Vets. And what they are is a number of rank and file grassroots veterans that banded together and started putting up billboards of the senators that were stepping in the way of the Major Richard Starr Act. And the billboard would say, Senator blank blocked consideration of the Major Richard Starr Act, denying wounded retirees their full pay. And that got a lot of attention. It got a lot of TV stories, and it got a lot of print media stories, and that got a lot of attention. And I think that's actually what broke this free. After 6 years of just sort of running up against the wall, that type of in your face political activism is what's needed. I mean, back when I worked in the Senate, we would have bills on the floor for 2, 3, 4 weeks. I would work. I would join my buddies at the bar for Friday night happy hour at 11:30 at night, still in a suit, because I'd been on the Senate floor working some bill until 11 o'clock that night. Mm-hmm. And we let people have their ability, let senators have their day in court, offer their amendment, maybe vote it down, but still give them the chance to have that say. That's not the case anymore. Bills are, the leadership and the committee leaders, they decide, off the floor how this is going to look. And they basically present it to the Senate as a fait accompli. And there's no back and forth between the Republicans and the Democrats. And it's unfortunately turned very binary. And so this has happened when the Democrats are in charge. This has happened when the Republicans are in charge. It's like, that governance is really not that big of an issue anymore. What's important is re-election and holding power. And so that, that's one of the fundamental problems here. Because I get it, when you're worried about re-election, you don't want your folks to have to take a bad vote. And oftentimes both Republicans and Democrats will do this. They'll put together an amendment that they know isn't going to pass, but they do it to force the other side to take a vote against it. So they can say, Senator Smith, voted to let more illegal aliens into the country, or Senator Smith voted to cut home heating assistance for your grandma. And it makes for a good ad, but it doesn't make for good governance. And back when I was a staffer, we'd have a situation like this. I'd go grab the other staffer from the other senator and I'd say, okay, let's go into the cloakroom and work out a deal. And we won because the vote would force the issue, and that doesn't happen anymore. So now everything is just slamming against each other, seeing it. The whole reconciliation process, is now the primary method of getting any major legislation done. From the time of President Clinton's fiscal stimulus package to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that President Trump was pushing. But the reconciliation process, which provides an automatic timeline for consideration of a bill and sets aside the filibuster, was never meant for big legislation. But, it's been corrupted into being that.
Wow. It's very unfortunate that that's a situation that you can't, just sit down and talk about it and figure out why somebody has a reserve on why they wouldn't want to do it, or why they're not voting in favor of, and then try to talk it through and figure out if you can change it or add to it, or, make it into a palatable bill for everybody.
Right.
That's crazy.
I mean, part of it also is that the federal government has become much larger. In real dollar terms, the federal government has grown about 65% since 2001.
Wow.
And so, and what the federal government does now matters a lot more to people because it's so much more involved. The fact that the Senate is having to pass a bill on housing reform. I mean, if there's ever a state and local issue, it's housing. But the federal government is now reaching down and trying to, and they're not like actually reaching down and changing state and local zoning ordinances. What they're doing is that they're offering money to states that do certain reforms. And that's the usual method that the federal government uses in order to be able to get states to comply with their wishes. They don't actually commandeer their local laws and say, no, you're going to do it this way now. They say, here's a bunch of money. Come and play with us. We'll give you the money.
Right. Yeah. It's they're trying to entice and get you to follow, makes you think, or makes people think that, this is your idea when really it's their idea, but you're just wanting, the resourcing behind the idea.
Right. And, at a certain point, the federal government's taxation eliminates the ability of individual states to raise their taxes to do it themselves because the federal taxes are already so high.
Right. Yes, because we're already taxed quite enough, I think.
Well, and you look at why so many people are moving out of California or Texas, California or New York or Illinois. It's because of taxes.
Right. Yeah, it's too expensive to live in California. A lot of Californians are coming to Texas. That's where I am. And then they've come to Idaho too, and they've inflated the market in Idaho artificially. And where a lot of Idahoans couldn't afford to buy homes, and kids had to stay living with their folks because the housing costs were so high. They've started to normalize now, but they were the highest in the nation. Was Boise, Idaho, had the highest housing market, based on economics and based on the economy there. A home in Boise, Idaho, just a normal home, nothing special. Maybe 2,000 square feet was over $700,000.
Right.
Yeah.
And here in DC, that's a relatively inexpensive home, but then the pay scales are higher. Probably out in Idaho, they're not.
They're not. Yeah, because they're a lot less than Texas, and the housing prices in Texas are in the 400,000 and 500,000 normal home. Some like smaller homes, maybe 300,000 is appropriate, but the wages are higher than they are there for sure.
Right.
So tell us about the 90-10 rule in education. What's that all about?
So one of the things that if you serve in the military, if you serve a certain amount of time, you can get the GI Bill. So usually it's 4 years, you get the GI Bill for yourself. If you serve an extra 2 years, you can transfer your GI Bill to your dependents. In fact, I have 2 sons that are in college right now, and they're each getting to use 2 years of my GI Bill. So it's an earned benefit. I had to sign on for additional time. It's no different than my retirement, but it's specifically for education.
Yeah.
But because it is a federal fund, the government tries to limit where it can be used. And they say it's to protect veterans, but what it really is about is protecting traditional schools. And the fact of the matter is that traditional 4-year brick and mortar public and private nonprofit schools are having their lunch eaten by for-profit schools and non-traditional schools. Why? Mm-hmm. Because it's gotten so expensive. I just heard that Colgate University basically is saying that their annual tuition and housing is going to be $105,000 a year.
Wow.
That's just outrageous, and no one can afford that. Mm-hmm. And so people are now starting to say college isn't worth it. And you know what? It probably isn't. One of the things that that has happened has been because the private and public private nonprofit and public schools are so heavily lobbying Congress. They went to Congress and said, okay, and they went to the Department of Education and said, these for-profit schools and these non-traditional schools, they're ripping off the veterans. So you need to put in place regulations that say to force them not to. So one of the regulations that was put in place is something called the 90-10 rule, that a school could not have more than 90% of its income come from federal sources. Now, I understand that they're going to say like the Pell Grant or ROTC scholarship, because those are for specific policy purposes of the military. But
Right.
for the GI Bill, that's my earned benefit, and them telling me where I can and cannot use my GI Bill is sort of the same as them saying, "Okay, thank you for your 32 years of service. Here's your retirement check. Oh, by the way, you can only buy your groceries at the commissary. You can't go to Safeway or Giant or Kroger."
Right.
And so that's fundamentally wrong. And so one of the things when we talk about the civil, legal, and constitutional rights of military and veterans is the right to contract. I should be able to contract with whom I see fit, who I see best. And so, like the way I describe this to Department of Education folks is, so let me get this straight. When I was on active duty, you know, America trusted me with the lives of its sons and daughters. But now that I'm a veteran, you don't trust me to make a proper decision about where I want to go to school and where I want to use my earned benefits. That's just, and so I call that condescending paternalism.
Yeah.
And that's the name of the reports that we've done over the last couple of years that have shown in pretty clear detail, you know, how wrong this policy is and how this has nothing to do with protecting the veteran, but protecting the oligopolistic market share of public and private nonprofit schools, who frankly are proving that they're not that good of a deal anymore. But they've invested, like I was reading one study where in, you know, the elite colleges, less than 25% of the total academic staff actually teach. More than 75% of the staff never teach. Of the academic staff never teach. They just research. And, you know, so much, and the vast majority of these schools' revenue is not coming from tuition, but coming from contracts, research contracts, and grants from the federal government.
Wow.
So you know, they call themselves nonprofit, but you know, their presidents and you know are making, I mean, like the president of Columbia University pulls in like $8 million a year.
Good gravy.
You know, meanwhile your average professor is probably making, you know, $1.50, $1.75. And that's a senior professor, you know, and you got these teaching assistants and these adjunct instructors that don't have tenure that are making like, I taught as an adjunct instructor at the Naval Academy before I became the director of the Federal Voting Assistance Program. Yeah. And we had, so I had a couple months to kill, and I had a buddy who was going to go on sabbatical. And so he asked me to take over his classes at the Naval Academy. And I was an adjunct instructor. And I was getting paid the equivalent. And I was teaching 4 courses. Okay. I mean, I had a full schedule. And I was getting paid the equivalent of $18,000 a year.
Wow.
I mean, and there's lots of adjunct instructors that are doing just that. Now, I was waiting for a job to start, and I was like, sure, this will be fun. I didn't care. But you know, for these other folks, they're usually doctoral students, and it's the only money they have coming in. And it's a, you know, it's indentured servitude.
It sure is. It sounds like it. That's unbelievable. I can't imagine that people really want to work that hard for that kind of money.
Well,
You know, having the professional degrees that you have in order to teach, because you have to have significant, you know, work in a particular field in order to teach adjunct at a college, and then to make those kinds of salaries for doing all that work, just hard to believe.
Yeah.
Hard to believe.
Yeah. You know, I mean, you know, and you look at the football coaches, and they're oftentimes the highest paid public employee in the state.
You know, that is true because I know of a person that works on a school board and they have to approve all the stipends for all the teachers. And we're talking about high school is what I'm referring to now, but
Right.
high school coach, the stipends that some of these teachers get for coaching and doing this stuff are unreal. And I had absolutely no idea they get these types of stipends, but they're
Yeah.
significant. They're a lot more than I get paid. Let me just say.
Hey, are you down in Texas?
Yes.
Friday Night Lights is big business.
It is. It is.
A lot of these schools bring in a lot of money with Friday night football.
Yeah. And some of those coaches, they make pretty good money for being high school coaches.
Yeah.
You know, not even at the
Right.
collegiate level, you know, they're still doing pretty good. It's very surprising.
Yeah.
But you can see where the
So,
priority
so,
is.
so the 90-10 rule was put in place in order to be able to try to prevent the non-traditional schools from getting all these students. And the reason that veteran students overwhelmingly use them is because so many of these veteran students are 22, 23, 24 years old as a freshman. They may be married. They're like, they don't want to go. They don't want, they want a job while they're going to school, and they don't want to, go to a 4-year brick and mortar school and hang out with a bunch of 18-year-olds. So they go to schools that provide, part-time education and online education.
Right.
Look, I'm pursuing my doctorate right now. I'm doing it online. It's real work.
It is real work. Yes.
They bust my butt. They hold me accountable.
Right.
The school, it can't manage its way administratively out of a paper bag, probably because it's online, but the academics are good.
Right.
And I used to teach. I used to teach at the Naval War College at the graduate level, and I taught at the Naval Academy in the undergraduate level. I have some idea about what's good and what's not, and this is real. But it wouldn't fit under what the 90-10 rule demands. And this is just more of Congress and stakeholders trying to use the government in order to be able to protect their market share.
So is there any move to repeal it? Is there any?
There is. Senator Banks of Indiana, a veteran himself, has recently introduced legislation to repeal it. Now, last year, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the reconciliation bill, did actually reform this. And it basically applied an equivalent of another type of rule called gainful employment. Used to be that that schools couldn't get federal dollars, even GI Bill money, if they couldn't prove that their students made more than someone that didn't go to college. But the algorithm that was used was pretty specious, so it was an unfair rule to begin with. But it was only applied to the non-traditional colleges and for-profit schools. And so the One Big Beautiful Bill Act changed that, so now it applies to all schools. Because as you'll find in our report, online, condescending paternalism, even before this happened, while these rules only applied to the private nonprofit schools, to the non-traditional schools, academic studies showed that 30-40% of the public and private nonprofit schools would also fail to meet the requirements of these rules. So now the rules apply. Now at least the financial transparency rule apply, or the gainful employment rule applies universally. But Senator Banks is also working to get rid of the 90-10 rule, and we continue to work on that as well.
So do you think it'll be coming up anytime soon for them to vote on, or do you think there's still a ways to go with that one?
There's probably still a ways to go with that one. Generally, what you find is that a bill doesn't pass on its first time being introduced. It generally takes a couple Congresses to get the you introduce the bill in Congress number one. You gin up some support. You get the stakeholders behind it. Maybe you have a hearing or two, and then generally you got to reintroduce it in the next Congress, and then you actually might get some action on it.
So speaking of getting and gaining support, do you think that the way they show how that works in Madam Secretary and in Lone Survivor are or designated survivor. That's the movie where they show the two parties, trying to get support from one another. They call their buddy and say, hey, so Senator this and that will do this if your senator will do this. Do they really go back and forth like that? Because they show a lot of mediation between the parties, and then a lot of
they do go back and forth. I will say that those I never watched those two shows because I tried to watch them and I was like, come on.
Because they're not realistic compared to what
No. If you watch shows, so West Wing,
yes,
was actually a little realistic, but no one has a bad day. West Wing sort of got the vibe and the feel of what the executive branch and especially the White House is like. And then the first couple of seasons of House of Cards got Congress right. That show totally jumped the shark after a couple of seasons, but the first couple of seasons, it got it pretty close. And I was impressed. Yeah. I mean, after season 3, season 4, it totally jumped the shark. But the first couple of seasons were good.
Well, I'll have to check it out. So what do you see as the most urgent civil or legal rights issue facing veterans right now? What is your single point of like, this one's the most pressing for us as veterans or military in general?
Well, in general, it's the size of the freaking government. The government is just too big. And considering that our country was founded on the concept of individual liberty, that whether you're talking about liberal versions of individual liberty or conservative versions of individual liberty, the size of government itself encroaches upon that from both a liberal perspective and a conservative perspective. And one of the places it starts is the military itself. We continue to try to drive a post-World War II, fight the communist horde, NATO mentality in our military when we don't have that threat. I mean, Russia should have been able to take over Ukraine in 2 weeks. They're now going on 4 years and they're getting their butts handed to them.
Right.
And so when people say, well, if we don't help them in Ukraine, they're going to go into Poland. They go into Poland, the Poles alone could probably beat them pretty bad. But the fact that the rest of NATO is already there, I mean, that it'll be over before it starts. But we continue to feel like we have to be everywhere and do everything. And I think that we do not need the size of this military because we no longer face the type of threats that we used to. We used to face an existential threat. Now we face threats that can make our lives difficult, but can't take over the country or can't destroy the country. And so, and then the second thing along the size of the military, I believe that, look, I used to fly airplanes, and I liked it. But I think the only reason we continue to make manned aircraft in the U.S. military is because we give out flight jackets. And it's cool.
It is cool.
And we don't need manned aircraft. We need lots of drones. And we need, smart kids that know how to use a lot of joysticks, operating 8, 12 drones at a time. And that can be in a trailer back in, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base for all I care. And you can still have man in the loop in order to be able to make sure that you don't do something stupid. But, the reason we needed man in the loop before is that we didn't have the communications capability we had before. And, we've always had fire and forget weapons. AI makes those fire and forget weapons a lot more powerful, but it's nothing new. I mean, what are mines but fire and forget weapons? Or, a missile. There are very few missiles have man in the loop. You fire them and they hone in on something, either a radar signal or heat signature, or a geolocation, and there's no man in the loop. So I think this is, I think a large part of the reason that we continue to have this is it's cool and people want to do it, but we don't need it anymore. On the tactical level, we've been working. You talked about gun rights.
Yeah.
There is a program within the Department of Veterans Affairs called the Fiduciary Program. And any rating official or any doctor can say, I don't think this veteran is capable of handling their veterans benefits anymore. So I'm going to refer them to the Fiduciary Program. And the Fiduciary Program is basically a bunch of bureaucrats sitting in the VA central office headquarters. And they make a determination, a bureaucrat, no court, makes a determination as to whether you are competent enough to handle your VA benefits. And since it's only the VA benefits they control, they say that due process isn't required. Now, here's the rub. Back in 1998, there was a law, and back in 1994, there's a law passed called the Brady Gun Violence Prevention Act.
Right. Yes.
And in 1998, the Clinton administration is bringing out their gun purchase database called the NICS database. And when you go to purchase a gun and they do a background check on you, they do it through the NICS database. And there's a lot of valid reasons why someone might be denied a gun. They're a felon. They're institutionalized. Whatever. Right. But the Clinton administration was finding that it didn't have enough people in the database, and so they wanted to get more people in there. And they specifically wanted to get more people in there who are determined to be mental defectives. And a PC, a term that would never survive the PC police nowadays, but it's called mental defect.
Wow.
And so the VA, in order to be able to help out the White House, get more names in there, says, well, we got 100,000 people that are in the fiduciary program. We'll make them, and so that you can call them a mental defective. And so then they all started getting letters saying, hey, you've been found to be a mental defective. You can no longer purchase or possess a firearm. No court, no due process, just a couple of bureaucrats. And so, National Defense Committee has been taking this on for a long time.
Yeah.
There was recently and so, but it has really driven a lot of veterans to not seek healthcare for fear that someone's going to, refer them to the fiduciary program. And that's a real problem.
Yeah, I didn't know there was such a thing, and I didn't know they could do such a thing. And I've not heard of this list. I mean, I know that they do background checks on weapons. I mean, I get all that, but I didn't realize there was this database that they were keeping, trying to increase the numbers and then putting people on fiduciary program on this list. That makes absolutely sense.
When you go down to Dick's Sporting Goods and you decide you want to buy yourself a 308 or a 22, and they go into that computer, that is the NICS database. They are accessing the NICS database to see if you are in there as a prohibited person.
That's very scary to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the sort of thing I'm talking about with the size of government. The size of government in and of itself is a threat to individual liberty. And I believe that the fundamental philosophy of the United States as a country is the protection of individual liberty.
Yes. Well, I mean, I know that Trump had been trying to reduce the size of government. Has it made an impact at all? Has it reduced in size since he's been in office?
Yeah, signed like 300, 400,000 people. I mean, and there's some agencies that are totally gone. Voice of America's gone. U.S. Agency for International Development's gone. And again, back in the 50s and 60s, when we were worried about the Soviet threat, there was nothing that we weren't willing to do. I mean, when you think about us, protecting the right, the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech, the fact that we had our own radio station with Voice of America, it's like, how is this any different from the Soviet propaganda that we're trying to fight? It's our own propaganda. And so, now there's a lot of discussion about getting rid of the Stars and Stripes newspaper. And people say, we can't do that. The troops need the paper. Hey, maybe in World War II, the troops needed the newspaper because the New York Times and the Washington Post wasn't going to be delivered to, Normandy. But nowadays, these troops probably have better access to the news than their commanders do because they're online all the time. They don't need Stars and Stripes. Get rid of the damn thing. I'm sorry. I swore. Sorry about that.
Well, that's true. I mean, technology has
rid of the darn
evolved. That's right. And communication has evolved, and we don't need some of these old communication forms that we once did because they were important back in their day. They were needed and warranted. But like you say, a lot of this technology is outdated and can be replaced by other communication venues and means. So I agree with you that, there is maybe some waste. I'm not that I'm trying to get rid of jobs or get rid of people, but I mean, there should be somewhere else they can produce the news or produce stories that are needing to be told.
Exactly.
For sure. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. Is there anything else that you wanted to put out to our audience to let them know about that's coming up or that people need to be aware of or working on and how can, or on the flip side of that, how can we support some of this legislation and some of these changes that need to get made? Is there a certain thing you would recommend? Do we contact our senators? Do we, our congressmen? What's next for us? What should we do to help ourselves and help National Defense Committee with some of these things?
And one of the people on chat said, "You're good to go, just so long as you don't use the F word." So I won't use that.
That's H. That's our executive director of MBR.
Oh, okay. Well, good to know that I'm that I'm safe there. One, they can go to our website. We keep up to date there, and it also has links to all of our social media. And some of this stuff is really, really dynamic. This whole Major Richard Starr Act and the military medical retirement. I mean, I haven't worked this hard since 9/11. On Thursday, I had an incredible day. I made 43 phone calls. I mean, and so it's really, really dynamic, and you can track it online. For those that are really interested in the Major Richard Starr Act, there's a group that National Defense Committee is allied with called the Veterans Justice Alliance. They have their own website. They have their own social media presence, and they do a lot of the social media on this, and also talk about what people can do in order to be able to get things done. Another one is called passtheact.org, and they can check them out. We work with them we're allied with them as well. I call these groups the billboard vets because they're the ones that started up the billboards, and it's a bunch of rank and file guys and gals who said, I've had enough and I want something different. So the other thing is, they can always reach out to us at National Defense Committee. They can always reach out to. I'll actually tell you guys my generic email address that I use for anyone that wants to contact me is bob.carey@nationaldefensecommittee.com. So if someone has an idea or has a problem, they can reach out to us at bob.carey@nationaldefensecommittee.com, and we'll help out how we can. But oftentimes that's how we hear about problems. Is someone calls me up and says, "Hey, I don't know if they meant it to do this way, but sometimes these bureaucratic regulations get so complex that things fall through the cracks, or they get overly complicated." And so that's part of it. And when they bring it up to us, we can then go to the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committees and Armed Services Committees and say, "We don't know if you actually meant this. You might want to fix it. What can we do to help you?" So that's what they can do there. And they can call their members of Congress or write their members of Congress. They can do it online and tell them to pass the Major Richard Starr Act. It's been around for 8 years. It's been the most popular bill in each of the last 4 Congresses. 80 co-sponsors in the Senate, 326 co-sponsors in the House. With that number of representatives and senators, we could pass constitutional amendments out of Congress. But it can't get. It's kept on getting waylaid at the last minute.
That's just crazy. I can't believe that. I mean, it's gone on way too long. It definitely does need to be passed. So we'll be waiting to hear on Friday. You said that there's a vote
in the House. Yep.
In the House. Yeah. Well, I really have appreciated the conversation and all the information tonight. You have been a wealth of information and a wealth of stories, and we appreciate that. And we thank you for the work that you're doing with the different committees and in the House and Senate and all the congressmen and the different groups you're lobbying with to help make a difference for veterans.
Thanks for the opportunity. Really do appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is Tracer Rounds signing off. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.